The metal was the first thing Ronan noticed. Not blood, not bodies, but metal torn apart, in a way that should not have been possible. The remains of a cart lay scattered across the mountain pass, its iron frame bent inward as if crushed by something with impossible strength. The wheels split, the reinforced edges chewed through and left jagged like broken bone, and Ronan crouched beside one of the pieces, his fingers brushing lightly against the surface, where deep marks cut through the metal. Not clean, not sharp, but ground down, as if something had bitten into it and dragged its teeth across until it gave way. And that alone was enough to tell him this was no ordinary predator. Nothing natural broke iron like this, not without tools, not without fire, and yet there were no signs of either, only tracks leading away from the wreckage and into the narrow path between the rocks. He followed them without hesitation, his boots grinding against gravel as the wind cut through the pass, cold and sharp, carrying with it the faint echo of something distant, something that might have been a growl if it had not been so low, so drawn out, that it blended with the sound of the mountain itself. The path climbed gradually, twisting between jagged cliffs that closed in tighter. The further he went, the sky above narrowing to a thin strip of gray light, and the air growing thinner with each step, until even his breath felt heavier in his chest. But he did not slow, because whatever had done this had not moved quietly. The marks it left behind were deliberate deep gouges carved into stone, where claws, or something like them, had struck the surface for grip, dragging itself upward with weight and force that would have slowed anything else. And yet the spacing between them showed no sign of strain, no unevenness, no hesitation. It had moved through this terrain as if it belonged here, as if it had always been part of it. And that made it worse because creatures that adapted to their environment were harder to predict, harder to trap and harder to kill. The pass opened slightly ahead, revealing the remains of another caravan, this one older. The wood rotted, the fabric torn away by wind and time, but the metal remained, and it too had been broken in the same way, crushed, bent, and torn apart, not scavenged, not taken, just destroyed and left behind, as if whatever had done it cared nothing for what it could not eat. Ronan stepped closer, his gaze scanning the ground, where bones lay scattered between the debris, not clean, not arranged like the last hunt, but broken, cracked open in places where the marrow had been taken. And yet even here, there was something wrong. The marks on the bone matched those on the metal, deep, uneven grooves pressed in with force rather than cut. And that told him something else. Whatever this creature was, it did not just eat flesh. It tested itself against harder things, as if it needed to, as if breaking them was part of how it survived. A low rumble echoed through the pass, then distant but unmistakable. Not the shifting of stone, not the wind, something deeper, something that vibrated through the ground itself. And Ronan's head lifted instantly, his eyes scanning the cliffs above, where loose rock clung to narrow ledges. And for a moment, he saw nothing, until a small cascade of gravel broke free from one of the higher points, falling in a thin stream down the side of the rock, and then stopping abruptly, as if whatever had disturbed it had moved again out of sight. He straightened slowly, his hand resting near the hilt of his blade, but not drawing it yet, because striking something he could not fully see was a mistake, and this creature had already proven it was not one to rush blindly. The wind shifted again, carrying a stronger scent, this time not just iron, not just cold stone, but something beneath it, something raw and animal mixed with the sharp tang of metal that lingered in the back of his throat. And Ronan exhaled slowly, because now he understood this thing did not just break metal. It consumed it, or at least tried to, and that meant its teeth, whatever they were made of, were harder than anything he had faced before, and anything that could do that would not fall easily. Not to steal, not to force alone, the path narrowed again ahead, leading into a darker section of the pass where the light barely reached and the air felt heavier, as if the mountain itself pressed inward, and Ronan moved forward into it. Without hesitation, his steps quieter now, more deliberate, as the sound of his own movement echoed back at him from the stone walls around him. And then he heard it again, closer this time. A grinding sound, slow and heavy, like stone being dragged across stone, followed by a sharp crack that echoed through the pass, and then silence complete and sudden, as if whatever had made the sound had stopped mid-motion and was now listening. The same way he was. Ronan did not move for a second. His gaze fixed ahead into the darkness, where the path curved out of sight. And for a brief moment the world seemed to narrow to that single point, that single stretch of shadow, where something waited unseen, and then a shape shifted, there just enough to break the line of the rock, not fully visible, not clear, but large, too large to be mistaken for anything else. And as it moved again, the faint sound of metal scraping against something hard followed, and Ronan Vorn finally drew his blade, the steel catching what little light remained as he stepped forward, because whatever waited in that darkness was not going to come to him quietly, and he had already seen what it could do to iron and bone alike, and that meant this hunt would not be decided by strength alone, but by whether or not he could find a way to break something that had never needed to break before. The sound did not come again after he drew his blade, but the silence that followed was not empty. It pressed in from all sides, heavy and watchful, as if the mountain itself had become aware of him. And Ronan moved forward into the narrow stretch of the pass without hesitation, his steps slower now, more deliberate, because whatever waited ahead had already chosen this place as its ground, and creatures that ruled their terrain did not give up their advantage easily. The walls of stone rose higher here, closing in until the sky above was nothing more than a thin, broken line, and the air felt colder, sharper. Each breath cutting deeper into his lungs as the path curved slightly to the right and the light faded further. The ground beneath his boots changed as well from loose gravel to harder packed stone, marked with deep grooves that ran along the surface in uneven patterns. And Ronan crouched briefly, his fingers brushing over one of the marks, the edges rough, not cut but pressed into the rock with force, the same pattern he had seen on the metal below, only deeper, stronger, and that confirmed it. Whatever made those marks did not just test itself against iron. It had grown beyond it. This was something that no longer needed softer prey to survive, something that pushed against the hardest surfaces it could find, and broke them as part of its nature. A faint metallic scrape echoed ahead, then low and drawn out, followed by a sharp crack that reverberated through the pass. And Ronan rose immediately, his gaze fixed on the bend in the path, where the darkness thickened, and for a moment nothing moved, nothing showed itself, until a fragment of stone dropped from above, striking the ground with a hollow sound, before rolling to a stop, and then another followed slightly larger. And then the scraping came again. Closer now, heavier, as if something shifted its weight, just out of sight. Ronan stepped forward 2 paces, then stopped again, because rushing into that blind turn would only give the creature the advantage of surprise, and he had no intention of walking into its strike. So instead he listened. The echoes in the pass carried sound in strange ways, but even through that distortion, there was a pattern. Slow movement, followed by stillness, then movement. Again, as if it advanced in stages, not from caution, but from control, and that alone told him enough. This was not something that charged blindly. It chose when to act and how, and it would not reveal itself fully until it decided the moment was right. The wind shifted briefly, cutting through the narrow space and bringing with it a stronger scent than before. Sharp metallic, mixed with something darker, something that lingered beneath it, like old blood dried into stone. And Ronan's grip tightened slightly on the hilt of his blade, because that smell meant it had fed here, not just passed through, and that meant it would not abandon this place easily. The scraping stopped suddenly, and the silence returned deeper than before, and then a shadow moved across the rock ahead. Not cast by light, but breaking it. A shape sliding along the wall above the path, too large to belong to anything that climbed naturally. And Ronan's head tilted upward just enough to catch it again. A glimpse this time, clearer. A limb pressed against the stone, ending, not in claws, but in something heavier. Something that struck the rock with a dull, grinding sound, as it shifted its weight, and then it moved out of sight again, further along the wall, staying above him, using the height, the narrowness of the pass to its advantage, and that confirmed the last piece of what he needed to know. This thing did not just break metal. It used the terrain with precision. It understood elevation angles, the limits of movement, and that meant it would strike from above or from behind, not from the front, where he expected it. Ronan adjusted his stance slightly, stepping closer to the inner side of the path, where the wall rose at a sharper angle, reducing the space from which it could drop directly onto him, his eyes moving constantly now from the ground to the walls to the shadows above, because the next moment would come fast when it chose to act, and he needed to be ready for it. The first sign was not sound, but vibration, a low tremor running through. The stone beneath his feet, just enough to feel, but not enough to see. And then it came a sudden burst of motion from above, as the creature launched itself down from the wall, its mass cutting through the narrow space between them with terrifying speed, its body striking the ground where he had stood a moment before, with enough force to crack the stone beneath it, fragments breaking free and scattering outward. And Ronan moved instantly, stepping to the side as it landed, his blade already in motion, as he brought it across in a sharp, controlled arc, aiming for the nearest limb, and the steel struck with a sound that was not right. Not the clean cut of flesh, nor the solid impact of bone, but something in between. A harsh, metallic grind as the edge bit into the surface and slid slightly before cutting through shallowly. Not enough, not deep enough. And Ronan pulled back immediately, creating space, as the creature turned toward him, fully. Now its form revealed in the dim light that filtered down from above its body. Low and powerful, built like a predator, but wrong in its proportions. Its limbs too thick, too heavy, its skin stretched tight over a structure that shifted beneath it, as if parts of it were not fixed in place, and its head lifted slightly, its jaw opening to reveal what he had already expected, and yet still was not prepared for teeth. Not like any animal, not like any blade, but something jagged and uneven, like broken shards of iron fused together, forming rows that ground against each other with a slow, deliberate motion as it closed its mouth again, and that grinding sound echoed through the past louder than before, sharper, as if it wanted him to hear it, to understand exactly what it could do. Ronan's eyes narrowed slightly as he adjusted his grip on the blade, because now the hunt had changed from tracking to survival, and whatever stood in front of him was not just strong. It was built to break anything that tried to stand against it, and that meant this would not be a fight he could win. By force alone, not unless he found something in it that could still be broken. The creature did not rush him again immediately after landing, and that alone made it worse, because anything that could hold that kind of force and choose not to use it all at once was something that understood restraint, and restraint meant control. Ronan shifted his weight slightly, his blade held low but ready, his eyes fixed on the thing as it straightened, just enough for its full shape to become clear in the narrow light of the pass. Its body built low to the ground, but massive in density, each movement carrying weight that pressed into the stone beneath it, leaving shallow fractures with every step, and its skin, if it could still be called that, looked wrong, stretched thin over plates that shifted beneath it. Not bone, not entirely something harder, something that caught the light in dull, uneven flashes as it moved. And when it opened its mouth again, the sound that came out was not a roar, but a grinding, metallic rasp, like iron dragged slowly across iron, the rows of jagged teeth inside its jaw moving against each other with deliberate pressure, as if testing themselves. Even in stillness, Ronan did not move first, because he had already seen what happened when he tried to meet its strength directly. The strike he had landed had barely cut it, and that meant his blade alone would not end this, not unless he found a weaker point, something the creature had not reinforced, and that meant he needed to make it move, make it reveal more than it had shown so far. The beast shifted, then its head lowering slightly, its body tensing, not in preparation for a direct charge, but something else, something more controlled. And then it moved, not toward him, but past him, its speed sudden and violent, as it darted to the side, its body slamming into the rock wall, with enough force to send a spray of stone fragments into the air, its jaws snapping shut against the surface, and Ronan saw it clearly this time, the teeth biting into the rock itself, grinding through it with slow, crushing pressure, as if the stone offered no resistance at all. And then it tore its head back, ripping a chunk free before letting it fall to the ground, where it shattered into smaller pieces, and the creature turned back toward him, its jaws still working slowly, as if savoring the sensation rather than feeding. And Ronan understood then, this was not just a weapon. It was part of how it existed, part of how it grew or tested itself. Whatever it had become, it relied on breaking harder things to sustain or strengthen itself, and that made the fight even worse because anything he used against it, any blade, any armor, would not be an obstacle, but an invitation. The creature lunged again, then faster than before, closing the distance in a single, violent burst, its claws striking downward toward him, and Ronan moved to meet it, but not with a direct block. This time he stepped inside the arc of the strike, letting the limb pass close to his side as he drove forward, his blade thrusting toward the underside of its neck, where the plates seemed thinner, where the movement beneath them was more visible, and the steel struck deep enough to matter. This time, biting through the surface and drawing something darker than blood, thick and slow. But the creature did not falter. It twisted instantly, its body bending in a way that should have broken its spine, but instead redirected the force of the strike away from anything vital, and its jaws snapped toward him, at the same moment forcing him to pull back quickly. As the teeth closed where his head had been, a heartbeat, before the sound of it echoing through the pass, like metal collapsing under pressure. Ronan stepped back, creating space, his breathing steady, despite the rising tension in his chest, because now he knew enough, not everything about it, but enough to understand that its strength came not just from what it was, but from how it was built. Layers of protection reinforced over time until only certain points remained. Vulnerable, and even those were guarded by movement by the way it shifted its body to protect them, and that meant he would not get many chances. Not clean ones, not easy ones. The creature circled him slowly now, its steps deliberate, its eyes fixed on him with that same cold awareness as before. And then it did something different. It lowered its head and struck the ground directly in front of him, its jaws slamming into the stone and tearing upward in a single motion, ripping a section of rock free and sending fragments outward, one of them striking Ronan across the shoulder, hard enough to stagger him slightly, and the creature followed immediately, not giving him time to recover its body, surging forward again, its claws slashing in a wide arc that forced him to step back again and again until he felt the wall of the pass at his back, the cold stone pressing against him with nowhere left to move. And that was when it committed fully, its jaws opening wide as it lunged straight for him, aiming not to wound, not to test, but to end it in a single, crushing bite. And Ronan reacted without hesitation, dropping low at the last possible moment, as the jaws snapped shut above him, the force of it shaking the stone behind him as he drove his blade upward with everything he had into the lower side of its jaw, the steel biting in, deep enough to lodge there for a second, before he wrenched it free and rolled to the side, just as the creature recoiled, its head jerking back in a violent motion, the grinding sound rising into something harsher, almost like anger. For the first time since the fight began, and Ronan pushed himself back to his feet immediately, because now he had seen it not clearly, not fully, but enough the underside of the jaw thinner, less reinforced, a point that had not been built for defense in the same way as the rest. And that was something he could use, but only if he could force it into position again, only if he could survive long enough to strike there properly. And as the creature turned back toward him, its movements sharper now, more aggressive, its restraint fading with each exchange, Ronan Vorn understood that the next moment would decide everything, because this thing was no longer testing him. It was done learning, and whatever came next would not leave room for another mistake. Ronan steadied himself against the stone for only a fraction of a moment before pushing away from it, because staying pinned in a place like this was the same as waiting to be crushed, and the creature had already shown that it preferred to end things quickly. Once it understood its opponent, its movements sharper now, less measured the restraint it had shown before fading with each exchange, as if it no longer needed to study him, no longer needed to learn, and that meant whatever he did next would have to be enough, because there would not be another chance to adjust. The beast shifted its weight again, its head lowering slightly, its jaws opening just enough for that grinding sound to spill out between its teeth, and Ronan's eyes fixed on it. Not on the surface, not on the plates that covered its body, but on the way. Those plates moved how they overlapped, how they shifted to protect certain areas more than others, and the pattern became clearer. The head heavily reinforced, the back layered thick, the limbs dense and built for impact. But the underside, the points of movement, the joints, the places where it needed flexibility, those were thinner, not weak, not exposed, but less protected than the rest. And that was where he would have to strike, not with force, not with repeated blows, but with a single decisive movement that reached something vital beneath the structure. The creature lunged again, cutting through his thoughts with violent speed, its claws slamming into the stone where he had stood. As he stepped aside, at the last moment, the impact sending another spray of rock into the air. And Ronan moved with it this time, not away, but around, keeping close enough to track its movement, without giving it the distance it needed to build momentum. Because the longer it had to gather force, the harder it would hit. And he had already felt what even a partial strike could do. The beast twisted quickly, its body turning with unnatural flexibility as it snapped toward him again, its jaws closing just short of his arm. As he pulled back, and for a brief second the underside of its jaw was exposed again, the same, thinner section he had struck before, but this time he did not take it. Not yet, because the angle was wrong, the position too close to its center where it could recover quickly, and he needed more than a wound. He needed a break, something that would stop it from closing those jaws again. The creature pressed forward relentlessly. Now its attacks coming faster, less spaced between each movement, as if it had abandoned caution entirely. And Ronan gave ground, just enough to draw it out, to force it into the narrowest part of the pass, where the walls pressed in tighter, where its size would limit its movement not completely, but enough. And the beast followed without hesitation, its focus locked on him, its body surging forward again, its claws striking in rapid succession, forcing him back step by step until the space around them narrowed further. The stone rising on either side, close enough that its full movement could not be used without striking the walls. And that was when it adjusted again, lowering its body, changing its angle to compensate, and Ronan saw the opening forming not from its attack, but from the way it corrected itself, the way it had to align its head differently, to strike in that confined space, bringing its jaw lower, closer to the ground for just a fraction longer than before. And that was all he needed. The creature lunged once more, its jaws opening wide as it drove forward, aiming to crush him against the stone. And Ronan stepped in, instead of away, closing the distance. In a single committed motion, his blade held tight as he dropped low beneath the arc of its attack, the force of it passing over him close enough to feel the rush of air as he drove upward. At the same moment, the steel striking into the underside of its jaw again. But this time, deeper. This time, angled to catch between the plates where the structure shifted, and he felt it. The difference. The blade sliding past resistance that had stopped it before, cutting into something softer, something that gave under pressure, and the creature reacted instantly, its entire body convulsing, as that grinding sound broke into something harsher, more unstable. Its jaws snapping shut and open again in rapid succession, as if trying to force the blade free, and Ronan held on for a heartbeat. Longer, twisting the weapon before pulling back and rolling clear as the beast recoiled violently, its head slamming into the stone wall beside it, hard enough to crack the surface and send fragments falling around them. But even then, it did not fall. It staggered for a second, then steadied its movements slower now, less precise, but still dangerous, still capable. And Ronan rose immediately, his breathing heavier now, his side burning, where its claws had torn into him, but his focus unbroken. Because now he knew the truth. This thing could not be cut down piece by piece, not like others. Its strength came from its structure, from the way it had been built to endure, to break everything that tried to stop it. And only by breaking that structure at its most vulnerable point could it be ended. And he had already found that point, not fully, not cleanly, but enough to know it existed. And the next strike would have to reach it completely. Would have to destroy whatever allowed those jaws to close with that force, because if it did not, the creature would recover. It would adapt again, and the chance would be gone. The beast turned back toward him. Then its movements slower but more focused, its head lowering once more as if guarding the very place he had struck its body, shifting to protect it. And Ronan Vorn understood that it had. Learned from the wound it had taken, and that meant the final exchange would not come easily. It would not give him that opening again, not without forcing it. And forcing it would mean risking everything in a single moment, because there would be no second chance, not against something like this. Ronan did not hesitate after that, because hesitation was the one thing this creature punished without fail. And he had already seen how quickly it adapted, how every moment it was allowed to think made it harder to kill. So he stepped forward before it could settle into its new guard, his blade low, his posture open enough to draw its focus away from the wound he had made, and the beast reacted immediately, its body tensing, its head lowering further as it prepared to strike again, its jaws grinding louder, now sharper, as if the damage he had dealt had only made it more aggressive, more determined to end the fight before it could be struck again. And Ronan moved first, closing the distance in a sudden controlled burst, not straight toward it, but slightly to the side, forcing it to adjust, forcing it to turn. And in that turn, the protection it had placed over its weakened point shifted just enough. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. And the creature lunged at the same moment, its claws sweeping toward him in a wide arc, meant to crush rather than cut. And Ronan did not block it. He stepped into it again, letting the force glance past him close enough to tear through his sleeve and bite into flesh as he drove forward inside its reach. Once more, the pain sharp, immediate, but ignored, because this was the only moment he would get. His blade came up from below in a tight, precise motion, aimed not at the surface, not at the plates, but at the space between them. The same point he had found before, and this time he did not stop when resistance came. He pushed through it, forcing the steel deeper, with everything he had left behind it, until it struck something solid, something that held the structure together. And he twisted, hard driving the blade further into that point, and the reaction was immediate and violent. The creature's entire body convulsed, its jaws snapping shut and open in rapid, uncontrolled bursts. The grinding sound breaking into a harsh, uneven screech, as if the mechanism that allowed it to bite had been damaged beyond control. Ronan did not pull back. He stepped closer, forcing the blade deeper. Still, ignoring the claws that tore into his side, ignoring the weight of the creature as it slammed into him. Because if he let go now, it would not end, it would recover, it would rebuild its defense, and the chance would be gone. So he held it there and twisted again, and something gave, not slowly, not partially, but completely, the tension in its body collapsing all at once as the structure that held it together failed. From within the jaws that had crushed iron moments before, snapped once more, then hung open uneven. And still the grinding sound cutting off abruptly. As the force behind it died, the creature staggered back, its limbs losing coordination, its weight shifting unevenly as it tried to steady itself. But the damage was too deep, too central, and Ronan wrenched the blade free, stepping away, as it took one more step, then another, before collapsing heavily onto the stone, the impact echoing through the pass as its body settled, and for a moment, it still moved, small twitches running through it, as if something within tried to hold on. But then those two faded, the plates along its body shifting once more before going still. The unnatural strength that had driven it gone, with whatever he had broken inside it. And the silence that followed was different from before. Not heavy, not waiting, just empty. The kind of silence that came after something had ended completely. Ronan stood there for a few seconds longer, his breathing steady, despite the blood that ran down his side, his gaze fixed on the fallen creature as he watched for any sign of movement, any attempt to rise again. But none came. The thing that had torn through iron and bone alike lay still, its power gone, its structure broken beyond repair, and slowly he lowered his blade, turning away from it, without looking back, because there was nothing left here that could threaten him. Now nothing left to hunt. The path behind him felt different as he moved through it. The tension that had filled the pass earlier, gone the air lighter. Despite the cold, the wind moving freely again between the cliffs, and when he reached the remains of the shattered caravans below, he did not stop. He stepped past them, continuing down the mountain without pause, because places like this did not stay empty for long. Something else would come, eventually. Something drawn by what had been left behind by the broken metal, the scattered bones. And when it did, it would find nothing here but silence, and the memory of something that had once ruled this pass and been brought down by something stronger. And as Ronan Raven disappeared into the forest below, he did not look back, because he knew better than to believe this was the last of its kind. Things like this did not come from nowhere. They were made, shaped by something deeper, something that had not yet been found, and sooner or later, he would follow that trail to its source, or it would find him first. And when it did, there would be no narrow pass, no broken terrain to limit it, only open ground and something far worse, waiting to see if even he could break it.